Díaghuíomh Maccordia. I'd like to start off with making a correction on a previous video I made. It's not a big deal, but I spoke about two people, one very influential, one less so, Karl Marx and Charles Kingsley. I spoke about them in a previous video, and I indicated that they were not they were not contemporaries. They were in fact contemporaries. I checked since, and Charles Kingsley and Marx were basically born within a decade of each other, a few years, a decade at the most, I think, and they died pretty much within a decade of each other. So that makes them pretty much contemporaries. I don't know why I thought this. I think it's I don't know why I thought it was the opposite, because I thought there might be a 50-year gap or 30-year gap between them. I think it's because most of the pictures I saw of Charles Kingsley were actually drawings. They weren't about. There's many photographs. There's one particular famous photograph of Karl Marx, and which seems to indicate that he's a more recent political, historical figure, and Kingsley is further back in the past, but that's not the case. So what I'm actually going to talk about is something called Megatrends. So Megatrends, I was given a project on Megatrends back in 2013. I was studying, and I went back to college part-time to do an MBA, and what happened, I wasn't really interested in this project. I was given this in preparation for a master's thesis. It was like a mini thesis. That's what it was supposed to be. I wasn't that interested in it. It sounded a bit like futurology, and futurology is something that kind of captivated me when I was a kid. So if you're a man of a certain age or a woman of a certain age, you will remember shows on your television sets like Tomorrow's World, and if you're American or Canadian, Beyond 2000 was sort of their version of it. And they were inevitably wrong, any of their predictions. So sometimes very, very wrong, sometimes not so much. Conceptually they were on the button, but when it came to the technology they were usually off. So that's one reason why I didn't want to do it, or really probably it was the only reason. But I was given this project, I did it, and I actually found it very interesting. So what are megatrends? They're you probably know, the name itself is self-explanatory. They're the big trends, they're the big forces in society that are moving society in a certain direction. Or they're actually not the forces that are moving society, they're the directions that society is itself is going towards. And you won't be surprised by most of them. Well, then they shouldn't be too controversial. But one might be, one in particular, one or two might be, but I will list them, the 5 most common ones that were listed. So, an aging population, that was one. Environmental degradation, that was another one. Competition for resources, that was the third typical one. What was? Oh yes, the proliferation of mobile technology. And the one that I found the most interesting was the rise of the multipolar world, the rise of the rest. And when I say these were the most common listed, what I mean is the people that were most concerned about megatrends tended to be From an academic point of view, of course, you would have universities, Ivy League schools, and even second tier third and fourth level education institutions. The other people, but I think the people that were most interested, well, governments would be interested if they want to plan resources, economic resources. Economists are interested, but financial institutions, I would say, are the most interested for the following reason. They basically want to know where the markets are so they can make money. So most of the reports on megatrends tended to come from financial institutions like Goldman Sachs, Credit Suisse, Ernst & Young, these type of big accountancy, marketing, financial firms, banks. And that's what they were interested in, basically making money, let's be honest about it. And I've listed the trends. I'll probably go into some detail where on one or two of them. So the rise of the rest is basically the rise of the developing world. In particular, what they were most interested in was the rise of what is now often called the BRICS. The BRICS, so that's Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. And the BRICS actually, I think that acronym BRICS actually came about by, I can't remember his name, he was some sort of financial guy or maybe an economist who coined this term. And I think that's what he was actually doing. He was actually formulating, he was trying to identify these megatrends. And I think that's where the actual term came out of. It's actually a Western term applied to a small group of countries, small group of big but influential countries. And at the time, the countries he identified were Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. And it's alleged that he only added South Africa on because he needed an S to make the word BRICS. But I find that hard to believe. Maybe it's true. The other ones that could have been controversial at one time, but it's not so much now, is the demographic changes, the aging population. Most of the world now the trajectory of their populations are moving from, if it was a youthful population, the population tree is becoming top heavy for older people, basically. People are living longer and having less children. And the TFR rates, the total fertility rates of countries in the world is falling for most Western countries, I think, South American countries, many Asian countries, most Asian countries, India, it's fallen below 2. And even the healthiest ones, it's usually at 1.6. The exception that's bucking the trend seems to be in Africa. Africa and a few other places, small places outside of Africa, but Africa is bucking this trend, but it's not really. The trajectory is heading in that direction. So there are countries in North Africa which have a TFR rate below 2. That's the replacement rate, 2.1. That's the replacement figure is 2.1. And so that means 2.1 children per couple, something like this, which you can't have. So I mean, so basically that means 10 couples, 20 people should produce 21 children. So Most places in the world outside of Africa are below the TFR rate. So it basically means the population of the world is stabilizing. This was controversial because you would be surprised how many people are not aware of it. I had an argument with somebody back in 2018. I was actually surprised when I first came across it. I first came across it back about 2014. I saw a TED talk with a demographer, and he was talking about this, how the world is actually stabilizing. The population growth is tapering off. And a few years later I was talking to somebody about this, and he's kind of an activist, has an activist mindset, left wing. He's a member of the gay or queer community, whatever way you want to describe it. He's very left wing. He was actually a Scottish man. We were friends, and he was very pro Scottish independence from the UK, and I won't say activist, but very, very politically switched on. That's what I would say. And when we were talking about this, and I had a feeling I could pick up on the way he was talking, that he had this idea in his mind that the world population is exponentially just getting bigger and bigger without any break at all. And I said to him, when I pointed this out to him, he literally went wild-eyed. What I said was, the population is starting to not shrink, but the rate of growth is starting to become smaller. And if the things keep going the way they are, it's going to taper off, and maybe for a period, 100 years in the future, maybe it might start going down. And this didn't sit well with him at all. He went wild-eyed in front of me. This conversation happened in work, and he Googled this, and when what I said was confirmed, he didn't know what to say. He still didn't want to acknowledge it, but he couldn't deny it. And even the UN were still taking the line that the population growth was still going to continue at the rate it was. And this was the UN or WHO, I can't remember. They were still on the same page of this continuous growth model, but since then the coming demographic crisis, which I believe is what it will be, is becoming more and more topical, certainly since 2018. So that one was controversial. The other one that might be controversial, but it wasn't too topical at the time. You would never hear them, a current affairs program or a documentary, maybe on YouTube, something like this. But in mainstream media, it wasn't spoken about as far as I could see. But the rise of the rest, the rise of the BRICS. Now, there was the idea of the emerging economies and stuff like this, but this concept of the BRICS was it was kind of an obscure topic. Only in the world of economists and financial experts, they would be talking about stuff like this. But this made it topical for me, at least in the beginning. And at the time I was blogging, you see, and I was blogging about local issues in my city in Ireland, Waterford, and I had a very small but influential group of people that were reading my blog, which I was happy enough with. There was only maybe a couple of hundred people at the most reading it regularly, but they were the people I wanted to focus on. And I wanted to switch the blog I had away to a more international topics, because the way I saw it was no city is isolated. It's integrated into its country. And its country is integrated to the international community. So I wanted to use the blog as a vector of what's going on in the wider world, and to inform people in my city of what's going on in the wider world, such as things like megatrends. And I did this. I made a first effort to talk about megatrends on the blog in around 2014, and the blog was going for. I had the blog going for a couple of years at that point, and what happened in 2014 was you had the Euromaidan protests in Ukraine, and which very quickly led to the overthrow of the government there, and the response by Russia was to annex Crimea initially, and later on invade Ukraine in February 2022. But the annexation of Crimea was the thing that kind of motivated me to write about this subject. Apologies, I had to help my daughter with something. So the annexation of Crimea happened, and sorry about that again. So I was motivated to write about this when Russia annexed Crimea. Now, I personally found, when I watched this, I was in work, this happened, and all the Polish guys were talking about it. They were sort of infuriated by this. I was terrified by this. I was terrified because I thought we had a sort of Cuban missile crisis situation, and I think the Polish I was working with were very gung-ho about it, and they wanted the Americans and everybody else to come in and intervene and go to war with Russia, which is a very foolhardy thing to do. Even if they did defeat Russia, the potential for catastrophe is so great that it just wouldn't be worth it. I would make the comparison to the Iraq War. The Iraq War was, on paper, was something that should have been over in a year, but it was something that just dragged on and on. Or the war in Afghanistan, which when America finally withdrew, was a catastrophe and a humiliation. So even if a war with Russia was won nominally, the potential for catastrophe, was just so great. Was if Russia collapsed into anarchy or something like this, you just don't know where the outcomes would have been. So that was the main reason it terrified me, because there was a tripwire here for a bigger catastrophe, even greater than the one that happened in 2022. But I also thought that it indicated something else, that the reports on megatrends that I was talking about, the rise of the rest in particular, this was becoming crystallized in Ukraine. all of a sudden you saw Russia asserting itself again. Suddenly you saw Russia annexing another country's territory. Now, and not only that, but I think it didn't only. It was the first event that probably brought this idea to the forefront of everybody's minds. But it was also the Western response to it was also probably accelerated or catalyzed this trend that was happening. It brought it forward. And I say this because for the simple reason the response to the West to the Russian invasion of Ukraine in 2022 was very feeble. Sorry, it wasn't feeble. It was very strong. It was very strong punitive sanctions against Russia, but they have been ineffective, let's say. And also the response to it was the creation of a narrative that didn't match reality on the ground as far as I was concerned. Now, the mega trend that I'm talking about of the rise of the rest, the interesting part of it was talking about the rise of India, the rise of China. The rise of China I won't say anything about really, or not too much, because it's we're all aware of it. But the fact that Russia was in there was something that surprised me, because I always thought Russia was written off after the collapse of the Soviet Union. The disastrous first 10 years of the restoration of Russia as an independent country. It was like the Wild West there, by all accounts, and they were led by this basically buffoon of a man, Boris Yeltsin, who I remember Boris Yeltsin. There used to be a situation where aircraft traveling from some distance to the United States, or would typically from Europe or from the Eurasian landmass, if they were crossing the Atlantic, many of them would refuel in an airport in Ireland called Shannon Airport. There was also a thing called a stopover, which made it compulsory for aircraft flying in Irish airspace to stop in Shannon. That's another story. I won't go into it. It was a ludicrous situation, but that's the way it was. And there was a convention then that if there was a world leader on a plane that refueled in Shannon, that the Irish government would send down some dignitaries to receive them and have a little talk, a little chinwag. And on one occasion, Boris Yeltsin, the president of the restored Russia, their plane was doing, their equivalent to Air Force One was refueling in Shannon, and Boris Yeltsin he was legless drunk, he was drunk, and his bodyguards and his staff couldn't wake him up. He was causing an embarrassment, you see, and he couldn't get off the plane, he was so drunk. There was another meeting around that time, there was another occasion around that time where there was some sort of convention or meeting between Russia and the United States, and you can find this online quite easily, where Bill Clinton was the president of America, and they're having this sort of conference with the Russians, and the Russians, Yeltsin was drunk, clearly drunk at the meeting, and you can see the Americans laughing, you know. You see, trying to, like, you could see Clinton looking over, like, and laughing, but trying to hide it, but not making too much effort, you know. There was no, in my view, there would have been a stoic, there should have been a more stoic, I mean, if Yeltsin is embarrassing himself, okay, but he wouldn't be the first drunk world leader. He would, but I think the responsible thing from the Americans' point of view was to put up a more stiff upper lip, more stoic outward appearance. You see, so and this kind of identified. This was the years of humiliation, I think, for Russia, and Vladimir Putin came along in the wake of that, probably took advantage of that, restored some sort of order on Russia, and started to rationalize things more. And this is not spoken about enough in the West. And if you talk about, but that was the period I thought Russia will never recover from this. And so when I saw these megatrends that were listing Russia as in that, let's say, over a certain period, Russia would become a sort of powerhouse in Europe. And the way it was described was like this: the megatrends across the board seem to predict that in 10 years' time, 20 years' time, sometime between 2025 now and 2050, Russia would be the only two countries that would hold their position economically in Europe. Would be Russia and Germany. And basically Russia would be the biggest economy in Europe alongside Germany. Now this is not, the size of the economy is measured by purchasing power parity, not nominal dollar amount, okay? So basically a dollar can get more in Russia than it can in Germany. So if a $4 trillion economy in Germany might be the equivalent of a $2 trillion economy in Russia, because your dollar goes further in Russia. That's basically, or a $12,000 salary in Russia is the equivalent of maybe $40,000 salary in New York, something like this. In America, so think of it that way. So even though the nominal size of the economy might not be as big as Germany's, when it's measured by purchasing power parity, it tells a different story. And many people consider purchasing power parity to be a better metric, because I think they imagine that the fact that the dollar, the US dollar, is the reserve currency, it creates, it helps buttress the American economy and the Western economies that are in that closer to America's political and economic sphere. So it's artificially, their economies are artificially buttressed by this. I'm not an expert, so I won't go into it in too much detail. So that was the shocking thing to me about this list of this inclusion of Russia in the list of emerging, the most important emerging countries, especially when it came to Europe. The other countries listed, Britain was losing its ascendant. Britain was no longer in an ascendant position at all. It was predicted to get not to be even. I think it was Britain and France were at the bottom well, not at the bottom, but at the top 10 say number 9 and 10. So I think this wasn't in Europe either. I think this was in the world. So Britain were actually going to keep falling down, and France, they were not going to maintain their position at all. And this is actually, I think, has transpired in the last few years. And this is a good indicator of, I think, where the world might go in the next few years. I'm going to stop this now and create another video, so I'll continue there.